And I'll just never forget, we had our quarterback busted like a 30-yard run and the place went insane. And I'm jumping up and down, hyping up the crowd, swinging my towel. And I feel somebody put their arm around me. And I thought it was one of my fellow interns or one of the players. And I look over and it's Ed Reed just jumping up and down with me, like hyping up the crowd. And I was just like, whoa.
Welcome to the Talking Shop podcast, where I'm here to share stories, lessons, and experiences in sports performance and professional development. I'm your host, Matt Thomas, and I'm super excited to be sharing this beautiful Zoom screen with Connor Schoepp. I totally just messed that up. I probably should have asked that beforehand. How are you doing today? And tell me something good that's going on in your life.
I'm great, man. Doing well, excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. Something great going on in my life right now is we are just in the heart of our spring season with soccer, and it's probably been one of the most fun times I've had with the team in a long time. So that's probably been the highlight of my most recent history.
Fantastic. And how do you say your last name? I probably should have asked that before.
Shep, it's okay.
Shep. Gotcha. You probably get that a
Butchered
lot.
my whole life. Yeah, don't worry about it, man. I don't take it personal anymore.
So Coach Schoepp is the applied performance coordinator and assistant athletic performance coach at Liberty University, kind of overseeing all of the Olympic stuff, if I remember from the last time we chatted, as well as working with men's soccer. And my relationship with Connor is another just stem from social media. I think he reached out for whatever reason, and then you're a good dude, and then we just chatted, and this is our like third, I think, ish time chatting. So the power of putting out good stuff, saying hello, being a good person, and then just like caring, I guess. So super glad that you decided to reach out that one day and that you still respond to my texts. So I'll take it. So Coach has spent time at Liberty, obviously Mississippi State, Pitt, Miami, Wake Forest, Colorado State, USF, Sioux Falls, and I know that I missed some along the way. So what are some of the stops that I missed, and then we will get into it.
Yeah, so outside of that, you kind of hit most of the most part, I think, from a college standpoint. Also spent a little bit of time in the NFL with the Arizona Cardinals and Coach Buddy Morris, as well as working at a couple high schools and in the private sector, various stops along the way.
I think at one point you said you had 10 stops in 10 years. Is that accurate, or am I making that up?
No, that sounds about right. To be honest, I get kind of lost in them all at some point, but I know I've moved 10 times in the last 10 years. Yeah.
Wow. So a little foreshadow. Hopefully we get into some of those stories just to tease the listener a little bit. But so I want to start before the big three questions I typically ask. I've messed around with these two kind of intro questions, and the more podcasts that I consume and just meet other professionals, I'm a big believer in nurture over nature. And as lame as it sounds, like just how impactful like parents and childhood are, not in like a cliche Freudian therapy type way, but like the big examples we have are our parents. So like, what were your folks like in a concise, polite way?
They were amazing. Very fortunate, growing up with the parents that I've had. Mom was a special ed teacher and home ec teacher in the middle school program in small town South Dakota. So that was fun growing up where, my mom was always at school every day. Dad was owned an outdoorsman store. So a lot of hunting gear, things like that, construction equipment, things along those lines. But yeah, getting to travel around and work with all these kids from, various backgrounds in the college setting. The older I get, the more I appreciate how good I had it growing up and, the examples that I had.
I feel like a theme with a lot of coaches is they had a coach or a teacher as one of their parents. So as you've gotten older, have you ever like my twin brother actually is a teacher, and we kind of talk sometimes about different kind of teaching themes, ideas, and like strategies. And he works with 7th, 8th graders, and that's a population I unfortunately work with. And he's like, dude, you do that for like 1 or 2 hours a day. I do that all day. But has that ever come up in conversation, kind of comparing and contrasting your experiences?
Yeah, no, definitely. I would say that's, starting out my career, it was probably the last thing from my mind. But I think the older I get, I probably get more and more like my mom. And the way she used to teach was just, you know, trying to make it a enjoyable experience. I think back to like the best teachers and coaches that I've had, and I don't really remember, any of the training things they did with me, any of the, motivational speeches or anything like that, but I can definitely tell you pretty quickly how all of them made me feel. And that is kind of the emphasis of what my mom did as a teacher was like, she was never the most locked in or the most strict teacher in the world, but she was always the favorite and always made a good experience for everybody in there. And the older I get, the more and more I appreciate that from her.
I totally agree. Yeah, it's the older I get, the smarter my parents get, or maybe
Yeah,
the less dumb I get, or a combo of both for sure.
definitely.
Um, so last kind of background topic. So any of those like childhood stories, like Gary Vee always talks about like having a lemonade stand, or your boy might have been the top popcorn seller a few times in Cub Scouts, just that entrepreneurial kind of mindset. Um, so any of those moments that like, coaching is a very unique profession where you got to be entrepreneurial, you got to I hate that I'm saying the word like grind. You got to work weird hours, but like anything that you think about growing up that kind of set you up for success in a field like this.
Yeah, I think specifically, I was one of those kids like if you would have told, young Connor Shep that he would have been a strength conditioning coach and working in sports at all, that I would have thought you were insane. I hated everything about it. I hated being outside. I hated playing sports. I definitely didn't want to train or do anything like that. I just loved, video games, all that stuff. And for whatever reason, my dad would take me to the middle school gym and kind of force me to play. And one day I just kind of, wandered into the weight room, and for whatever reason, I was like a naturally pretty strong kid. I don't know if I just matured older than everyone else or whatever it was, but just found success with it for the first time, like in any athletic endeavor. And yeah, man, from that point on, I just kind of became hooked. Loved training, loved lifting. And that definitely was kind of the catalyst that set me up for my career now.
Mm. Yeah, it's at the beginning of that story, I was like, and how does that lead to playing college football at USF? But yeah, I definitely have those stories of like I'm fortunate. I grew up like 10 houses from the elementary school that had two big baseball fields. So my
Mm-hmm.
dad was always like, "Hey, let's go hit or let's go do whatever." And probably just that idea of like you can do more than just the games, I think is impactful. And then always having to think outside the box, like coaching is definitely not a clock in, clock out field. So definitely cool to kind of look back to see how those small things kind of really did add up in the end. But cool. So we will get into it. What is the biggest kind of fork in the road moment? Or if you had to look back, if that one decision had been a left instead of a right, um, things would all be different.
Yeah, so I would say it was right in the heart of COVID. So when I was the assistant strength conditioning coach of Mississippi State football. We got let go after the bowl game. Just lost one too many games and had some opportunities for employment at the time. This was I think 2019. They're all kind of jumbled together now, but I was having some health issues at the time. Really messed my back up to a point where I couldn't even really accept employment at the time, which is where I was fortunate enough. I got held on the Olympic side for a little bit at Mississippi State. They kind of created a pseudo position for me to, kind of stick it out and let my health get a little bit better before I moved on. And then COVID hit and kind of shut everything down. It looked like everything was going to be, at least on the college athletics side, shut down for the foreseeable future. So ended up going home. Health was garbage. Nobody was hiring at the time because all the budgets were frozen. And at that point, man, it was pretty tough. I didn't know if like physically I was going to be able to continue to do the job. Nobody was hiring. I had been an assistant at two Power Five schools, and I couldn't beg somebody to email me back or give me a call. And I was looking at going back and get my MBA, going back, athletic trainer. I applied for a real estate job,
Mm.
which is crazy to think now. And then one day I get a call from Buffalo, New York, and Buddy Morris offered to bring me out for the 2020 season with Arizona. And if it wasn't for him, I'd honestly probably be selling houses right now back in South Dakota and living that whole life.
That is interesting. A question my coworker and I've had is like, if you could do something not related to this at all, what would you do? Um, And I would pick financial advisor just because it's like money, but then also you have to like kind of, it's like training, but for money.
Yeah, yeah,
But definitely hard to imagine like not as there are the long days and the bad days and whatnot. Like, man, I couldn't imagine kind of not doing this, not being on the floor and actually kind of coaching and stuff. So, um, do you remember where you were when you got that call? I have a feeling you do.
yeah. No, definitely. I was laying in my bed, playing some video game just to kind of keep my mind busy at the time. And yeah, I'll never forget getting the call from Buffalo, New York. And like, I don't know what you know about Buddy,
Not
but
much.
he has a infinity for hate for Buffalo, New York,
Oh,
because that's yeah, it's his
weird
wife. His
combo.
wife is from there, and yeah, grew up there and hates the cold. And I was like, well, I know this couldn't be him. So yeah, that was a definitely fork in the road moment that I'll never forget that popping up on my phone. I don't think I could have grabbed it any faster when I realized who it was.
Mm. So you knew already that he was from Buffalo? Had you
I knew
known
they
him
were from
prior?
there. I just couldn't believe that he still had that cell phone number. So I was a little skeptical at the time, but I eventually put two and two together.
So you knew him from before.
Yeah, so my mentor is Anthony Paroli, is the assistant or the director in Tampa Bay right now. He was Buddy's longtime assistant and had kind of a hunch that he was going to be reaching out at the time.
Interesting. Cool, cool, cool. Last on that kind of story, getting to the NFL level, what was something that met your expectations, kind of comparing contrasting Power 5 to that, and something that you had a preconceived notion about that kind of not necessarily let you down, but definitely just didn't meet kind of what you had mentally planned beforehand?
Mm. I think the thing that probably shocked me the most when I got there is just like how similar it all is. I think like when people think about the pro level or even Power Five level, they think it's this like, grandiose, so like completely different experience. You got all these, tools and facilities and uh, you know, all these like freak athletes. And really at the end of the day, like it's still people, it's still training, it's still football. And it's all of those things are really the big rocks that actually matter. And I got a tough time giving you, a disappointed expectation because it was probably the greatest experience of my life. Yeah, I I wish I could give you one, but I can't. It was pretty amazing. There's a lot of amazing people there that really helped me get to where I'm at today. So I couldn't give you one.
That's also a big kind of light bulb for me as I'm accumulating 3 years full time at my current facility, and I've started to train more pro athletes. I've been a part of two combine seasons, as well as just some pros privately, and like they all do the same stuff, just they pick it up a little bit quicker. Maybe they're not as poor at movements to start, and their outputs are a little bit higher, but like you don't really do anything much different as opposed to like a high school athlete. Like pro athletes, it was it was so shocking that the first one I had as like my client, she played in the WNBA, and it was like after the warm up of our first session, and I was like, why am I so out of breath? Like I'm so tired right now. And it's because I was coaching the crap out of it, because if I gave a bad demo, she was going to do it exactly like I did it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would show something, then she would have a follow-up question about it. I'm like, this doesn't happen. Normally I have to like get on these kids to like listen, and then you're asking follow-up questions. But um this receiver I'm currently working with in the CFL, like we still do all of the same drills, but I'll give them a cue and they'll like pick it up right away. But like we're
Mm-hmm.
still doing the same training, and although the changes in their movements might not be as dramatic from like pre to post, they still improve. They're still going for their 95% on their sprints. They're still just accumulating good training, hitting a variety of movements and whatnot. I just think the changes aren't as dramatic, but it's still kind of the same stuff if I had to compare and contrast.
Yeah, no doubt. I think that actually brings up a really good point. Of one of my big takeaways from there was that I got to spend a lot of time training our rookie class there. And especially when we first got there, I kind of got to spend the majority of my time with them. And like, You're so right in the fact that like these guys are such elite athletes and they're able to pick up things so fast. But what was fascinating for me was like seeing all these guys coming from different training backgrounds and all these
Mm,
different, things that they had been exposed to and how that showed themselves like during training. Like it was super obvious the guys that had spent, 4 years under a barbell and just,
yeah,
grind it out for like day after day. And then the guys that maybe, were on maybe a little bit of the other end of the spectrum and like how that truly influenced how they moved. And like it was crazy, man, just how many like steps back we had to take with some of those guys. It was just like, hey, this is how you pull the slack out of a trap bar. This is how you set your shoulder blades when you bench. And things like that. It was wild to see all those different training influences like come together as guys got in. And then the other thing was with the older guys, and I think you hit the nail on the head, was like the older they got, the more mature they were, they knew exactly what they needed to do to get ready. And like being able to take a step back and just kind of help in that process was really eye opening for me.
for sure. Yeah. And the biggest kind of eye-opening experience about combine training is these guys do 4 to 5 years of college football, and, like, they've never done, like, really good speed work, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, "Oh, man, this is gonna be incredible. We'll do all this overspeed, all this," and it's like, your A march looks awful. So definitely, a cool experience, but valuable to have literally, when I say, like, 9-year-olds up to pros, plus adults, like, I've done it all, so cool to kinda compare and contrast, but, moving on, the coolest/craziest slash craziest story, so, like, looking back, you're like, "Geez, I could not make that up if I tried," or, like, if you just met someone at a bar, what's the story you kinda always pull out of your back pocket when they ask you about being a college and pro strength coach?
Yeah. So I would say I was an intern at Miami and during the Mark Richt era, 2016, 17, I forget what year it is already. But we were at that time undefeated. I think we were heading into our eighth or ninth game of the year. And we had worked our way up to, I think, being the number four team in the country. And we had won like a lot of really close games, like a couple overtime games. Like, I'm not going to lie, like, we probably got lucky a few times. And we were playing undefeated Notre Dame as well at home. It was the 4 versus 2 matchup. It was the first time Miami had ever had college game day in the history of the program, which
Wow.
obviously like how successful they've been, and like that's just crazy to think to me. But it was this huge deal. Paul Feinbaum was this like talking head in the SEC that like came out and said how the U was just like they weren't back. They were going to get blown out by Notre Dame. Hadn't played against any like real football teams that were going to like pound the ball. And man, we like went on to just blow them out of the water. Like absolutely dominated them. And I'll just never forget. We had our quarterback busted like a 30-yard run, and the place went insane. And I'm jumping up and down, hyping up the crowd, swinging my towel, and I feel somebody put their arm around me. And I thought it was one of my fellow interns or one of the players. And I look over, and it's Ed Reed just jumping up and down with me, like hyping up the crowd. And I was just like, whoa, that
Whoa.
is, as a guy that got to play safety a little bit in college, like that was like the coolest thing in the world to me at the time. So
Oh
yeah.
my gosh, yeah, that place must have been rocking.
Yeah. And I mean, they play in that, the NFL stadium, Hard Rock down in Miami. And for the most part, they don't sell out. But for that game, it was insane. Definitely the biggest environment I've ever been in.
How cool is it, or do you have any moments like that? I feel like it happens more with, like, RTP athletes, but when, like, whether an athlete just had a really good play and they're on the sideline, and then you just, like, make that eye contact and they're like, "We did it, like, we're here, like, all the time we put in." Do you have any kinda moments kinda like that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's kind of been the cool thing about my role now. And probably one of my most recent ventures was I had a soccer athlete's ACL tear in the spring of last year. And pretty much from that point on, as soon as, I think we gave him like 3 days off. And from that point on, we were spending pretty much every day together. Uh, Stuck around in the summer to train and rehab. Spent the whole season with me, you know, rehabbing and reconditioning, and just went through this really, pretty intensive 7-month rehab process with each other. And just about a month ago now, we had our first game back, and getting to see the joy on his face, and the experience of him just getting back out on the field with his team. His family was there. That was probably one of the most rewarding moments in my career so far, was just seeing like how much joy he had just getting back to play. It was unreal, man. Yeah.
Geez, getting goosebumps just thinking about that.
Yeah, I really do, man. He was like, it couldn't have happened to like a better kid. And to see him just like pour himself into the process, man, was like such an eye-opening experience for me, of like how much of an impact we can have, like obviously from a training standpoint, but then just like the mental side of like getting them back to where they were, and how appreciative you can be of like when you actually get back to where you were. Yeah.
Love it, love it. So, last kind of big question. The full circle slash story you're most proud of. So I think a theme of today has been having the opportunity to kind of look back and appreciate some stuff. As I'm totally not in my quarter life crisis right now, but but any story that like maybe didn't make the most sense in the moment, but now it does, or like looking back, you're like that turned out exactly how it should have.
Man, that's a good one. I would say I'll give you one that just kind of recently happened, not too long ago. You familiar with Vern Gambetta?
Yes.
Yeah. So the first book I ever read when I decided to get into strength conditioning was Athletic Development by Vern. Um, like I think I bought it when I was like a sophomore in college, when I was like kind of thinking about getting into this field, and read it cover to cover probably 2 or 3 times at the time, and I thought it was kind of everything. And then from there, obviously like my career happens, go through all these things, move to all these places, do all these different things. I went from high school to private sector to college to the pros, back to college, back to the private sector, and like all these different kind of jumps back and forth. And like it really wore on me for a long time. But then, I started putting some stuff out, and, just sharing some things online that I was doing that I thought was pretty cool. And just one day I get a DM from Vern, asking, about something I had put out, saying that he had really liked it and wanted to talk to me about it on the phone. And I got to talk to him for like 2 or 3 hours before I even told him that. But it was really just kind of like this, like full circle moment of like, man, like, you know, at the end of the day, he's just a guy and a coach, but like for have somebody that I like had a big influence on the start of my career reach out to me and, want to talk shop about, things that I'm doing or stuff that I'm putting out, man, was like a really, really, full circle experience that I was stoked about.
This question's coming up again. Do you remember where you were when you got that DM?
Yeah, I was in my office at like 6 at night on the whiteboard working on something. But yeah, yeah, never forget that one for sure.
It's those moments like I got called about just a job opening, and they'd gotten my number from somewhere else. And I was outside at the time, but I'm like looking at this transcribed voicemail. I said, "Hey, I'm XYZ, and like I have this person's book, similar to you." And then I remember I was like, "Is this where my life changes right now?" And then it didn't work out, for different reasons. But
Yeah.
I was just like, I just sat there. I was like in a chair in the living room, and it was like a Sunday. I'd like just raked leaves. I'm just like I screenshot the transcription of the voicemail, but it's like those moments do happen. They sound like they almost don't, but they do, if that kind of makes sense. Like I'm sure someone hearing it like that will happen to you if you're doing good stuff for good people and you're doing it consistently. And um yeah, I can only imagine kind of ending that phone call, you're like, that just happened.
Oh yeah, no, it was great. Like it's because I think especially at the time, like when you're first getting into the field, like I think you romanticize a little bit of like some of these other people in it, right?
Mhm.
And it's like you kind of spend some more time in it and you get to know them, and it's like, oh, like they're really no different than you and I. Like, they've just probably been doing it longer and, maybe share a little bit more. But yeah, it really is a cool experience when you do kind of get that, I don't want to say gratification, but, it was just that like validation of like, oh, wow, like this has started to work out. Like this work has been, worth it. Right.
Yeah, just confirmation that you're doing good stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome. So, last question, quick one. So, do you have like a little mantra or advice or like anything short, sweet, action oriented, whether it's like someone puts it on a sticky note on their mirror or just what do you find yourself either telling others, what kind of keeps you kind of centered or grounded or kind of motivated, or like what phrase do you think could kind of sum up your journey so far that you could offer as potential advice?
Uh, yeah, it's probably a little corny, but like just gratitude. I was a super negative person for a long time. I think by nature that's just kind of who I was, and then like had to move all these times, had to go through all the experiences, had multiple, issues with my health and my employment and all these different things, man. And like I look back on it now and I'm so thankful that I went through all that. And probably the best thing I ever did for myself is just every day when I wake up or when I get into the office, just making time to write down what I'm thankful for. Because it really has just changed my whole perspective on what I get to do, and not necessarily what I have to do.
For sure. What was the closest move you had to make and the farthest move you had to make?
Closest move that would have been, man, that's actually a really good question. I think it was probably Wake Forest to Miami. It was only like, oh, that was probably only like 6 hours, six,
Was
seven
the
hours.
closest one was 6 hours? Oh, okay.
And I think from there, the farthest one I'll never forget was Colorado State to Wake Forest was a straight through shot, one drive there, which was the most miserable like 48 hours of my life. So I don't
Dang,
ever that to anybody. Yeah, that was
dang.
yeah, that was a wagon.
I would do Chicago to Fort Worth in a day. That's like 17.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh,
It must be a Midwest thing because like I met people in Texas, they would fly from like Dallas to San Antonio or Houston. It's like a 30-minute flight, 3-hour drive. I'm like, what is wrong with you? And like 17, 12, like those are all fair game, but Midwest thing for sure.
no doubt. I'll never forget. We went on a spring break one year from Sioux Falls, South Dakota to South Padre Island, and it was like a 24-hour drive. We drive like 12 hours and we're like, oh, like we're already in Texas. Well, then you realize Texas is its own country and it's
Mm.
like a whole other 12 hours to get to that place. And it was like, man, never again.
Well, like half your spring break just getting there.
Oh, it really was.
And then
Yeah.
the other half getting back, and then there's your spring break.
Yeah.
So I want to say thank you very much for taking the time, being open and candid, kind of sharing your stories and your journey. Where can the listeners get more Coach Shep?
Uh, Connor Schoepp SC on Instagram and Twitter. ConnorSchoeppSC. And then if anybody ever wants to reach out, Connor.ShepSC@gmail.com. Yeah, feel free to reach out anytime.
Super nice guy, super super good practitioner about all things kind of RTP performance. I know you kind of had some of the sports science efforts at Liberty, as well as a guy who has been there, done that. So 10 out of 10 would recommend. So I want to say thank you very much again, and I look forward to chatting next time.
Thanks for having me on.